My name's Ron Ashtiani. I've been in the games industry 26 years this year, and I was on the original dev team as a senior artist. And I work with the Nightdive team. I don't really have a title. I'm really the sort of holder of all the art knowledge. So, you know, what are all the concepts? Where are they from? Where are all the assets from? Like franchise art director, so I kind of know, all of the reasons behind the look for the game and the style, and make sure that the team stay on track with what we're making.
Can you just describe your how you got involved with the remaster project?
Yeah, so I got involved with the remaster project through Joel, also known as Welsh on the team. He's a massive Thing fan, and he kind of I post things on Twitter,
Hmm.
about the thing. I've been Thing obsessed for 20 years, and
Rightfully so. Rightfully
yeah,
so.
I've made numerous projects since then relating to the thing. I've done concept art. I've worked on a couple of ill-fated sequel games that didn't make it. And I always post these things and he always comments. And then eventually he got in touch with me and said, "Hey, I'm working on something that could be really cool. It hasn't come off yet, but if it does, are you interested?" And we sort of started chatting. And then eventually I just happened to be at GDC and he said, "Hey, you should meet the guys because I think this project's going to go ahead." So yeah, I think that was March last year.
Hmm.
And then I was working with the team by sort of November, December last year.
Cool. That's amazing. I love stories like that, and I appreciate you joining me today. Is it a case where they come to you and you make sure that they're not breaking your babies?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like my background, I've been an artist 20, like I say, 26 years in games and an art director. And that's really what I've been helping the guys with is understanding the thing. What are the key pillars of the visual design of it? What can we do? What can we change? What can't we change? All the usual.
Give me a little peek into that design Bible. What are with the thing remaster? What has to stay the same? What's allowed to be touched and changed?
Absolutely. I mean, so one of the things we decided really early on is not to do a remake.
Hmm.
It's a remaster, not a remake. And
Hmm.
when you see some of the remake games on, that have come out recently, they are very much like completely different assets.
Yep.
Things are wildly different. Whereas we're taking the original game and almost like trying to look at it through the rose-tinted glasses of it. How do I remember that game being?
Yeah.
Not like when it was funny how I remember it in my mind because I haven't played it for 20 years.
Yep.
And then I basically played it for the first time maybe 10 months ago, and I was like, oh my god, this is bad. Some of the
Yeah.
graphics are quite bad. So it's trying to recreate what's in my mind rather than in my memory, rather than what's really there. And I guess the key things is not to mess with the layouts of the levels, not to mess with the general vibe, not to change any of the kind of story or anything like that. And also the monsters in particular and the creatures, they were pretty special back then, so not to change those. So we're doing tons of like up-res textures, up-res models, improved animation. We're also adding like things like much better lighting, post-process effects, blood effects and stuff like that. Yeah, and you have to bear in mind as well, back then, we weren't using Unreal Engine or anything like that. So cross-platform sort of development was really you had to develop for the lowest powered console or the lowest powered machine, and then
Totally.
you could have some slightly higher res textures and maybe use some of the higher LODs in the models, but you couldn't do a radically different kind of graphical output like you can with say Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine will do quite a different thing for Switch versus PS5, for example, whereas our engine back then was what it was. But yeah, so when you particularly look at like some of the stuff we had to do with 2D sprites and things like that,
Mhm.
it's way better to see it as real geometry. And the other thing is lighting. I think we only had one or two lights in each scene.
Right.
And the thing, when you watch the movies, it's all lighting. So much of
Hmm.
it is character hero, so much of it is like shadow play. John Carpenter did so much cool stuff with limited budget. So a lot of stuff is just a shadow on a wall and things like
Hmm.
that, which is telling the story in itself.
Yep.
And so we're going to be able to do a bit more of that with the new lighting engine.
That's amazing. I'm excited. Yeah, Mark was saying that, like, when you turned the flashlight on, that used every like 90% of the RAM on the system or something, and now
It
he
used to
you know,
jug.
you're playing with all the lights you want, so
You turn the torch on PS2, and the frame rate would like take a
zero.
noticeable hit.
I'm gonna assume you start with a huge, brainstorm or whatever. This is what we want to do, and how do you narrow that? What can you speak to that a little bit on like, taking the scope and like, okay, what's realistic? What are must-haves and what are maybe sort of nice to haves? What is your process in that coming from the sort of the art side of things?
Yeah, I mean, actually, with that happens in most projects, but with this
Yeah.
one, surprisingly, so far anyway, we haven't had to go through the sort of harsh
Yeah.
reality of what's going to get cut. I mean, you know, most of the stuff we looked at was like upresing models,
Yep.
animation, textures, which is sort of standard remaster work. And then the big thing was like, can we completely change the lighting engine? Can we
Mhm.
add post-process effects? Because the other thing is with the Thing movies is John Carpenter used quite heavy post-process and color filters
Mhm.
depending on the different scenes we're seeing, and the game didn't have any of that. We just had to sort of tint all the textures roughly in that color, and it didn't hold the same sort of look that the films did. So we should be able to do that as well. So I think that all of those things are sort of already kind of like planned for the
Yeah.
remaster, and then there are some gameplay things that back then gamers had a sort of very different approach to what they tolerate. I think the Thing is quite a slow paced game, if you know what I
Mhm.
mean, and that worked 23 years ago or whatever it was now. But I think these days people expect a bit of a faster pace, and there's a reason that I think one of the reasons why the game was a bit slower back then was we really heavily limited ammo and health and things like that. So we're talking about maybe a little bit of balancing there to sort of improve the pace of the game for a new generation of player. And then I think we're also talking about maybe having a classic mode in there where
Yeah.
the hardcore can play it as it was, but
You
it'll
run
take
out
you
of
forever.
ammo, you run out of ammo. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. If you run out of ammo, you're
Yeah.
dead. If one of your NPCs dies, you're
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah, Mark was talking about that in, like, such a fine balance where you don't wanna sand off the edges too much because,
Yeah,
a lot the people who enjoyed it back then, there were reasons why they enjoyed it. They're like, "Well, this is quite difficult," and but yeah, like you said, that fine balance between, new school players and old school players and hitting that and, maybe the answer is I know you're still a ways away, but, like, maybe the answer is that classic mode or hardcore mode or whatever you call it. So, I'm very, very curious to see what direction you guys go um,
yeah.
with
I
that.
think some of it's also like signposting and better signposting in game as to what you're supposed
Yeah.
to do next. Like I was playing the game
Mhm.
a few months ago, and I got stuck, and I could not remember for the life of me how you
Where
finish
are
this
you?
level. And in the end, it was a tiny little key on top of like a barrel in the
Right.
corner of a room.
Yeah.
And there was the key wasn't glinting, there was no UI showing what it was. You literally had to find it with your eyes like you would in real
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And I did think, we're asking a bit much of the player
Yeah.
to find a tiny key. And, it's
Well,
like,
there's
I think we could
the
probably,
industry joke now is the yellow paint on the wall, right? It's like the yellow
yeah.
paint to send you towards climbing up that. Maybe you do
Well, I
something
don't think
that
we're
way.
going to go that far. I think
No,
people are
I
still
know,
going to,
I know, I know. I know Mark was very he didn't wanna muck the UI up because a lot of the tension and a lot of the style comes from a clean interface, right? Like, you don't want a big highlighted box around, "Key is here," but again, that's a development challenge, so,
just needs a little, the
little
key just
just a
needs a
little
little
glint, just a
sparkle.
little
A
glint,
little
yeah.
blend.
Direct
When
the
you're looking
eyes,
around, you
direct
go, "Oh,
the
what's
eyes.
that?" And yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
It needs something because
see?
I think
Let
we expected a lot of people back then.
I think and like I said, coming from that generation, like, people tolerated a lot. Like, back when you paid your like, I grew up renting a game for 3 days. You paid $3, and that was it. You didn't get to like, that was your game for the weekend, and you either played through it and got stuck and put it off, or just, like I was stubborn, so I would just keep pushing through it. So I took those lessons into, the PS1, PS2 era, and I was like, "Alright, let's go. Challenge me." So, And maybe
I
that's why I like the Souls series so much, is that
You get the game, and
yeah,
what I used to do was I'd rent the game for 3 days, and I would just hammer it. Like, so
yeah,
I'd play it pretty much as soon as I got home till like bed, like
yeah,
late, and then I
until you
just
were
keep going.
allowed.
Yeah, and sometimes I'd have a friend over, and we'd
Mhm,
do take it in turns to get through it. But some really great times playing games like that. And
totally.
I've playing the thing again. What I thought was really sort of like surprising, but also a really good feeling
Mhm.
was it's a good game. It's still
Yeah, it's
20
got
odd
good
years later,
bones.
a great
It's got
game. And
great bones.
I really enjoyed playing it again. And actually, what was good was that I'd forgotten a lot of the stuff. So because I'd forgotten it, it was like I was playing
Yeah,
it for
what
the
a
first
treat,
time
hey?
again.
Yeah,
That was fantastic to play one of my own, a game I worked on,
yeah.
like a consumer would. It was great.
Great. I'm just curious what your day-to-day like is with the team. Are you in the trenches? Are you sitting back and just, like, answering questions? Are you directing traffic? What does that look like for you on a project like this?
Yeah, I mean, we've been finding our own way with it really, but I'm part-time, so I'm not like in the
Yeah.
trenches with the
Yeah,
guys
yeah.
building assets. I couldn't really. I think I do like, a day a week or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that with the team. Most of my time has been playing through the original game to start with and spotting all the things that were a bit crap.
Yep.
So I did a big document of like these are the things that if we were to remaster this game, I would revisit.
Yeah.
And also a little bit of these are the things that I would leave alone and don't touch that. And I did an art direction sort of Bible that was, a
Nice.
good hefty tome of do's and don'ts for the thing, and it had original concept art and explaining what the concept art is and why we can't touch certain elements of this. So that the early stages were probably the busiest stages for me because it was
Yeah.
assembling all this stuff and trying to teach the team about the thing.
Right.
But now they all get it. I mean, it's fantastic watching the Discord thread and seeing them all chatting
Yeah.
with each other and posting, assets and critiquing each other's work. And, I haven't really had to do a great deal of critiquing. There's just been a couple of things I spot every now and again when I go, oh, that's a bit weird. Let's revisit that. But I think when we get into lighting and post, then I'm gonna have to get really stuck
Dive
in
back
again.
in. Yeah. Yeah. 'Cause,
Yeah,
yeah, like you said, lighting such an important thing for a horror game or a movie. Lighting and audio too, like, those go hand in hand with the visuals. It's all, um, the trifecta there, and, I was curious with having coming back after 20 years, you're obviously looking at this game differently, but would you I guess my question is, have approaching this game, what have you learned over the last 20 years? How would you approach it differently than, say, making the sequel or making the remake, 15 years ago or 10 years ago? Like, are there experiences you've had where you're like, I like, is there, I'm just curious, like, what are you telling the team or what, why is Ron here? Why do we need him? Other than because, that upfront design Bible is so key in teaching the people how the thing does what it does. Like, yeah, I'm just interested in like, what have you garnered over the last 20 years that you can come back and be like, I know how to fix this problem. If
so
you don't
much
have
stuff.
anything off the top of the head, that's okay.
No,
But
no,
I was
it's
just,
so much
yeah,
stuff. I mean, the thing is, but back then when we made the thing, I was like 20. What was I? 20, 24 years old,
hmm
and I was considered to be one of the senior guys on the team. This is
amazing.
how young we were. I mean, our senior producer, Chris Hadley, was like, I think he was like 30 or something like that.
That's
And
crazy.
we all looked at him like he was old Father Time himself.
Yeah,
So we were a really young team, and that came with some good things and some bad things. Like the good thing, I think, was that we had that strength that only you get from naivety.
yeah.
So by that I mean we had no idea what it takes to make an amazing game. We just worked as hard as we possibly could for like 2, 3 years, and eventually what we produced was good. But
Yeah.
to be honest, we didn't even know how good it was going to be until almost the last couple of months. It was kind of
Well,
because we were just grafting away, and none of us had any experience of what a good game looks like. You know what I mean? We were just working really hard. Um, I think the downside there's a bunch of downsides. Like one of them is the way we worked. I mean, we
Mhm.
just crunched and crunched and crunched and crunched to get that game done.
Yeah.
Because none of us had like wives or kids at home, you know.
You're
So
willing to put in that work, right? Like,
when you've got a bunch of 20 to sort of 25 year
yeah,
olds making a game, we could just work, 12-hour days,
yeah,
5-6 days a week, no problem for years, and now looking back, that seems totally unsustainable and
totally.
really quite kind of well, just bad management really from
Yeah.
from that point of view. The other thing as well is we changed our minds a lot. Like
Mhm.
that was the other thing is there were points where the design felt like it was changing almost daily,
Mhm.
and it did settle down into a groove. But yeah, the every game I've worked on since then has been a lot more gated in its development. There's been some decision making here. This is what we're doing, and then we develop that, and then we test to see if it's fun. And
Yeah.
if it is fun, great. If it's not fun, we'll try something else. But in this instance, we were just, quite seat of the pants, like altering things and trying things out, which was a bit crazy. But we
Well,
got there. It was a good
that's
result.
amazing. I love it. Well, like even working in film, it's like, for every hour of pre-production, you save a day of, you know, production work because, follow the plan, right?
Yeah, and I think visually, um, I think that the one of the things, obviously, I've been an art director ever, for a long time
Yeah.
since then, and I've worked in films. I worked on 3 Marvel movies, and a whole load of video games. So I kind of I've dedicated my life really to that role, and I think that one of the things,
Ah,
the sort of
sorry.
elements about the art style that I think I would do differently is I think that it's not always consistent. So when you play the thing game, the things in the environment jump around a little bit. Like we go from one style to another style to another style, and it's because we had different artists working on each different
Right.
level, and they kind of own that level. So at least the level itself is consistent. But when you look at them as a series of environments, they're not consistent, and that's
Yeah.
because we didn't have an overarching kind of art bible. We
Yep.
didn't have concept art for the environments. So back then we only had concept for the creatures and the characters, but the environments were entirely down to each environment artist. So I built maybe half of the levels, and mine looked quite different from Paul
Right.
Herbert's or Jeff Goslin's or whatever. A bit more harmony there would have been good.
I totally appreciate that, when I'm color correcting a film, you have 3 shots in a row and you're like, "That one's red and that one's blue. They need to be green." You know what I mean? Or like they both need to be blue. So it's those things that if done well, the audience doesn't notice how well they're done. But it's jarring if it's not done well, you know?
Yeah, and do you know what? It's good enough. It's good enough that when I read all the reviews, no one ever brings that up. It's just more me as a sort of now a
Yeah.
professional art director. I look at it and go, it's a little bit all over the place. But I think the good thing was back then, because teams were much smaller. I used to sit here, Jeff Goslin sat
Over
next to
there,
me, and
yeah.
Paul Herbert was right behind me. So between us, we'd sort of be like, "Oh, what are you doing for crates in your level? Oh, I've got this texture here." You'd be like, "Oh, can you chuck it over?"
Yeah, yeah.
And you'd end up sharing textures and sharing assets anyway. So we did sort of harmonize just
Cool.
through sort of being so close to each other in the studio. But at the same time, it would have been nice in hindsight to have more concept art and a sort of properly laid out design for level progression, and the look of things.
Totally. Is there anything that you've, done with this remaster that you're most proud of? Or maybe something that the audience might notice that you wanted to call out?
Um, I think things I'm proud of. I'm proud of everything I've seen so far from the team. The team have been amazing. That's the main thing. Is they're so dedicated, and the amount of assets they churn out is incredible. Like, I'll take my eyes off Discord for 2 days, and I'll come
Mhm.
back, and they'll be like, "Oh, there's 10 more monsters been done, and a bunch of other environments." But I think for me, the real big stuff is going to be that lighting system,
Yeah.
because it, for any developer out there who's worked on PS2, you'll know it's just impossible to get decent lighting on PS2. You're constantly sort of coming up with some fakery.
Yeah.
We used to paint all the shadows in the first game are painted into the meshes using
Oh
vertex
my
colors.
gosh.
exactly, like old school,
Oh
old
my
school
gosh.
PlayStation 1 sort of methods of
Yeah.
doing it. And we did our best, but I always like wanted to do a remake or a sequel using a much better engine.
Yeah.
And I did actually do like a prototype for a sequel game in Unreal back in 2010 with
Okay.
another team. But seeing the screenshots and seeing what the guys have produced, it's gonna look amazing,
Oh,
with that new lighting system in. And that's the thing that I'm most excited about.
that's
One of the things I think that is also going to be very cool is the vault.
yeah.
And
Oh my
I,
goodness.
I, well, you asked me earlier about what have I been sort of working on mainly, and that was one of the other things I spent a lot of time on
Yeah.
was, I've been in touch with almost everyone in the original dev team,
Yeah.
finding, concepts, files, old trailers, all sorts of stuff, and gathered it all together in one
Oh,
place. And then finding out who did what. And I've managed to figure most of it out. It's not entirely complete, but yeah, it was 20 years ago. I mean, some people's memories just
goes.
aren't what
I
they
don't even
used
know
to
what I
be.
did last month.
Well, Joel pointed something out, and he started asking me questions about something like I should know the answer.
Yeah.
And about halfway through, I was like, "Dude, I don't know. I'm gonna have to look into this." And he goes, "Well, you made it." And I'm looking at this
You're like,
asset, and I'm like, "Did I?"
you're
And
like,
he's
I've
like,
made
"Yeah,
a lot of things.
your name's in the file name." And I was like, "Man, I can't remember making that at all." Just like completely like. So
That's
yeah,
amazing.
stuff does fade, unfortunately. Siggy, different people were really different. People had different approaches to archiving things. Like some guys didn't archive anything, and their work's just
Yeah.
lost. Siggy, is it Galean? Galean, one of the fantastic artists on the original team. He's a great guy. He sent me like just tons of
Oh, he just
assets, like
had it. Oh, amazing. Yeah.
and it's all labeled and it's all beautifully laid out. And he'd
Oh,
even checked all the max files to make sure they loaded for me and all this stuff.
oh, nice.
What a legend! But he was great. I mean, he
Oh,
did a lot of the monsters in the original game,
nice.
and yeah, his organization skills and passion really showed through in it. So he did great.
He's a champion of the game preservation. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
totally. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you again so much for your time, and I appreciate you joining me here today. And we're definitely going to have to check back in once that lighting system's in, or maybe upon release, and we'll see how things went.
Cool. All right. Take care.